Welcome, everyone, to the Progress City Radio Hour Town Hall. I'm Jeff Crawford. I am pleased to be joined by my brother, Michael Crawford. Michael, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Really excited for today's Town Hall.
Yeah, it's been a long time since we've done a Town Hall, right?
Yes, we've wanted to keep at it. We've just had some missed connections and misfires and miscues, but we're coming back with a bang this time.
That's right. We started looking into some landscapers of Disney history in conjunction with our Adventureland episode. And I would say a companion piece to this is our Adventureland Part 2, where we profile Bill Evans. But we had the great privilege to talk to Scott Girard, who worked under Bill Evans. He was a mentor to Scott, and he would continue working through the development of Walt Disney World for decades, becoming the chief landscape architect and the general manager of Disney's horticulture program down there. Michael, this has been a real treat to talk to Scott.
Yeah, this is so exciting. I mean, it's always exciting to talk to somebody who, he worked as a young guy at Disneyland. He worked on the creation of Walt Disney World. We've got, coming up in future episodes, Epcot in Tokyo. So excited to talk to Scott because he was there for so many of these key moments and lived it firsthand.
That's right. And, I just feel like this landscaping story doesn't get told enough as part of a whole of Disney's theme park design. It's such a crucial part of what they do. And obviously, to have someone so involved through so many different stages has been a real treat. So we're going to jump right in and get to talking to Scott. Here he is. Today, we'd like to welcome Scott Girard to the podcast. Scott, thanks for joining us.
It's so good to be with you. So good to be with you.
So you grew up in Anaheim, and you became a so-called theme park rat at a young age. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
My parent, we grew up in the middle of an orange grove that turned out to be about 3 blocks south of the property that Walt bought.
Wow.
And so, we heard about this thing that was coming, and of course, we could hear all the equipment once the construction started. So, being a bright young kid at 7 or 8 years old back then, I used to ride my bike up to the site, and they didn't have a fence around the site. And my grade school, Catella Elementary, sat kitty corner from the property that Walt had.
Wow.
So during the summertime, I'd ride over to the property occasionally, and then once school started, then I'd ride over to the site every day after school before I rode my bike home. And this only took a year to build the park before opening, and so I was in and out of the park a couple times. They didn't have any. They had some security, but they weren't real strict about it. I just made sure I kind of stayed out of the way. But so that's how I started. And my first exposure to Disneyland was during construction.
That's a very unique lens. You are like the perfect age to really absorb that. How cool. And you would go on to work at Disneyland on the monorail and go on to work at some more things. Can you tell us what it was like in your early days as a cast member?
Sure. It was really wonderful. Walt was still around then. I joined the company in 1964. I just started my freshman year in college and studying landscape architecture, and I working on the monorail and steam trains, which were they weren't owned by Disneyland. They were owned by a company called Retlaw.
Right.
Walter spelled backwards, and of course you guys probably know all about that. And so the Disney family still owned those trains, and Walt loved the steam trains. And there was on more than one occasion that I recall Walt would be on the property, and he'd want to drive the steam trains during operating hours. He was in the park every time I ever knew he was in the park. He was driving a steam train. So that one day we were down in Frontierland on the train I was working on, and we got a call from Main Street Station that said Walt's here, and he's going to take the next train. We were working 2 trains on the line at the time, and back then they still had the spur at Frontierland Station, and back when they used to run a 2-train operation from Main Street, it would go round trip, and it would pass the train in the station at Frontierland, and the passenger train would go all the way around without stopping. And the old freight train only operated from the Frontierland station. So there was a spur at Main Street, and it went past the passenger train that was loading and unloading in Main Street, if you kind of get that view. So anyway, we're down in Frontierland. We weren't operating like that then, but when Walt wanted to drive, he wanted to drive nonstop. Through any of the stations. Of course, we had Tomorrowland Station then. So we would make an announcement for the guests that were already on the train. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to pull this train off onto the spur for a few minutes. And if you want to get off, we'll give you a re-ticket to get back on the train. Or if you want to sit here and see Walt Disney drive by on the next train, you can stay on board. So nobody get off the train. So we pull up into the tunnel like you're going to the Indian Village from Frontierland, throw the switch, back the train onto the spur. And once the line was clear, we'd call up to Main Street. It wasn't but a couple minutes, and here'd come the train behind us, and Walt was hanging out the cab, driving the train, and he'd run right through the Frontierland. He'd run right around the park without stopping. He'd make about 4 loops.
Would he take a train with passengers, or would he just take an empty train?
Well, when he and I've been on the other train end of the story too. When he was going to take the train from Main Street, we'd make an announcement on the train that, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be making a couple of nonstop loops. Now, if you want to get off and wait in the waiting area here, or if you want to just take the train around a few times, you'd be feel free. But if you think we're not stopping at Frontierland or Tomorrowland for 3 or 4 loops. And of course, everybody was excited to see Walt, and off we go. And around the park we go, and he'd have it was fun. It was fun.
What were the interactions like that you would see him having with cast members and with guests, for that matter, in the park?
He was very patient with autograph seekers, and the first time I met him was in Town Square. Met him to talk to him, and it was the summer of '65, just before Lincoln opened. He had his apartment up over the firehouse and in Town Square, and I had an opening shift on the steam train that summer. And every morning I'd open Main Street Station, but I would always start my trip to the station. Instead of walking all the way backstage, from the locker room just to the station, I'd pop out onto Main Street up near the hub, and I always liked to walk down Main Street, the 2 blocks to the Main Street Station, because the streets were still wet from being washed down, and window washers were still there washing all the windows, and the music was on, and it was just a magical experience to walk down Main Street on those sunny mornings like that. Nobody else in the park, and a couple mornings in a row, about the same time, I was walking south to the station, Main Street Station, and Walt was walking east from the firehouse to the Opera House, where they were installing Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln. And the second morning, and he was always very cordial. Good morning, how are you? And the second morning, he stopped and he looked at my name tag and he said, Scotty, you like working on the trains? I said, yes, sir, I sure do. And he says, well, so do I. So do I. But we sat down on a park bench there, and he wanted to know, are you going? He wanted to know if I was going to college. What am I studying? And I told him, I said, landscape architecture. And he says, oh gosh, he says, you need to know Bill Evans. And I said, well, I do know Bill. Bill Evans. Of course, you guys know Bill Evans, right?
Oh, sure, yes.
Yeah. Every year for Cal Poly Pomona, he would host a field day. As the park back then during the winter months, the park was closed Monday, Tuesday. And he would host a field day every year for the landscape architecture students at Cal Poly.
Oh, wow.
So I got acquainted with Bill doing that. And so he said, you need to know Bill. But he was very cordial. He wanted to know all about, me, where I grew up, and was I going to college, and what was I studying? And, it was just a very enjoyable discussion.
I would imagine it would just have had to have been very special to be there at a time when he was still around and the park was growing and evolving so fast. I would imagine that, Disneyland is always great, but that period would have just had to been just extra special.
It was wonderful. It really was. It was like you say, the park was growing, and but for me, a landscape architecture student, it was like a botanic garden, and I studied my plant material as I rode around on the steps of the steam trains, and to be able to, as I was learning my plant material in college, see how the plants were used, properly used in a landscape. So I had a 4-year journeyman's education beyond my college education.
Absolutely. What got you interested in landscape architecture?
It's very interesting. I'd studied my pre-college stuff in high school and so forth. I had a lot of math, and I was going to be an architect. And I had been accepted at UCLA. They had started a small architecture program, and the summer after I graduated from high school, I graduated at age 17, and you couldn't work at Disneyland until you were 18. But I remember standing in my parents' living room. They had some big sliding glass doors looking out into our backyard, and I was looking at the landscaping there and thinking about all the many times I've been in the park over the years as a child and an adolescent and so forth. And I thought, somebody has to decide where these plants go. And so I called up to UCLA, and I told them, I spoke to the admissions office, and they said, oh, that's landscape architecture, and we don't offer that. And they said, well, who does? And they said, well, Cal Poly Pomona is one of the best schools on the coast. So I called up to Cal Poly entrance, the enrollment office, and they said, yeah, but you have to have all your paperwork here, cutoffs in about 10 days. So I and this is pre-computer now.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I drove up there and got all my paperwork and brought it home and filled it out and took it back and got my letter of acceptance. And that was where I started in Cal Poly.
That's great. And while you were in school, you were at Disneyland. I wonder, did you work for Retlaw or for Disneyland while you were on the trains?
Retlaw, monorails and steam trains. Actually, we would get a wed paycheck. All my friends out in working other attractions and other divisions in Disneyland would get a Disneyland check.
Right.
And I always look forward to getting that check with the Disneyland logo on it. And I was disappointed. My first paycheck, it had this big red and blue and black futuristic logo from Wet ED. But yeah, Retlaw made their payroll out of WED.
It turns out you had the cooler check in the long run.
Well, I didn't find that out till later. Yeah.
That's really interesting. They had it set up that way. Who did you, when you were on the trains or the monorails, was there like a separate reporting structure up, or at one point did Disneyland have oversight?
Disneyland always, it was an interesting corporate structure. My supervisors, in fact, the young operations supervisor who hired me into Retlaw was Jim Cora.
Oh, wow.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Jim had been a friend and colleague for years and years. Jim was assistant supervisor, and Paul Legg was an assistant supervisor, and Jack Ader was a supervisor then. But they were all Retlaw employees as well. They were the supervision team, the management team for the monorail and steam trains back in those years. But it was interesting because the family, the Retlaw, owned the rolling stock, if you will, the monorail trains and the steam trains and the carriages and whatnot. They didn't own the right of way. They didn't own the beamways. They didn't own the railroad right of way. That all belonged to Disneyland.
Interesting.
So I'd have to research the dates that the deal was when Retlaw was sold to Disneyland, but I can't pull it out of my head right.
Sure, it's just an interesting setup that it was that way.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned you did a sort of a master class just throughout your working of being in this landscaping environment, and landscaping has traditionally been such an important part of the theme park experience for Disney. I just wonder if you would talk a little about how fundamental landscaping, horticulture, those arts are to themed entertainment.
Oh, they're profoundly important. It's part of to me, the way I learned it and the way I believed it, and the way I coached all of the young people that came to work for us within the landscape architecture department. And the way I was coached by Bill, we're part of the show. Landscaping is part of the show. It's an important part. It's a component. And Bill used to like to talk about the show and Disneyland itself being a symphony, and every component has a part or a role to play, and would be disparate if it all wasn't in concert one to another. And a good way to point that out is you don't see pine trees on the Jungle Cruise.
Right.
And you don't see palm trees up near what used to be the old Swiss Chalet for the Skyway.
Mm-hmm.
The landscape forms and plant materials and things and the plant selections reinforce the architecture and the story being told. It's all about the story. I mean, we're just part of the story, and we're there to reinforce the story that's being told. And the wonderful thing about Disneyland is even the guest becomes part of the story. I mean, it's like a three-dimensional book. You don't see when you come through the turnstile in front of the Floral Mickey. There's a large gathering space there, what we call a decision-making space. And then the guest moves from the outside world through the tunnels into this magical place. And there's Town Square, and that's another decision-making place. And people gather and move on down through Main Street. And so it moves from one scene to the next. And, it's this wonderful pace, pedestrian scale that prepares everyone for what's to come down Main Street. And the music supports it. The aromas support it from the candy shop, and all these wonderful senses. And then you get to the hub, and it's a nice park. It's lots of trees, lots of shade, and another decision-making point. And where are we going? And okay, you can go that direction. We'll meet back here at noon, and we'll all have lunch, and all those kinds of things. So the landscape provides so much visual acuity to the story. And I mean, even so much if we think about the berms,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
around the park that are heavily landscaped, you know, that's for keeping the outside world out visually, you know,
Right.
traps your eyes, stops your eyes from going out and bringing that outside world into this really wonderful story that you're enjoying.
I wonder, during your early days of being brought into this world and, learning from Bill Evans early on, did he talk about how these things were developed in the early days, how the berm and all that came about?
Yeah. We covered that. I mean, we'd move some berms around even while I was working at Disneyland on the steam trains. I watched, how berms were built and moved, and Bill had some old photographs, and of course, when once maybe we'll get to this point about how Bill hired me to become move to WED and so forth out of Disneyland, but it's the same theory and theme from Walt Disney World, the Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World, to Tokyo Disneyland, to Epcot, to all of the parks. The berms serve such a vital role in themed entertainment.
Yeah, the one in California, as somebody who grew up going to Disney World, it's just amazing that on the other side of that is just, a neighborhood or a
Right.
series of hotels. It's just so effective in that. Yeah, I read this story about them moving the berm, I guess when they put in Small World, and how they would just get the
Right.
trees out, put them back in, it's just
Yeah.
an amazing
Right.
operation.
Now, and also you're talking about, Bill and history and the berms and so forth. California has a long history of nursery industries and so forth, but
Mhm.
not specimen trees, not large trees. And so Bill was able to accomplish what he did for large trees simply by saving material that was in the way of the Santa Ana Freeway, Interstate,
Mm,
Yes.
as neighborhoods, rights of way were being purchased, and they'd rush down. He and a couple of contractors that he had hired would rush down there in the middle of the night before the bulldozers showed up the next morning to plow everything under. And so he gathered, trees that way for Disneyland. And of course, he tried to save a lot of the orange trees. He worked with a survey of the existing grove of all the tree locations, and where the grade didn't have to change and there was going to be no paving, he tried like the Dickens to save orange trees because they were, 18 to 20 feet by 18 to 20 feet wide.
right. Yeah.
Mature groves, and you just don't find a tree like that on every place. So he tried to do that, and there was a section of the park he always used to tell a story about. He'd put red surveyor's tape on the trees that were to stay, and green surveyor's tape on the trees that it could be removed. And the bulldozer operator arrived early the next morning, and started pushing trees over and getting them out of the way. And Bill arrived about 2 hours and stopped him real quick. Turns out the bulldozer operator was colorblind, and he was taking the wrong trees. So,
Back when they couldn't spare those trees, they needed those
That's right.
trees.
yeah, that's right, exactly.
Well, I think that's something that's very neat about Disneyland is that there are these. I think of the Dominguez palm, which is a famous example of these real heritage plants that have been there for so long and are landmarks in and of themselves.
Right. There's absolutely no question about it. No question about it.
So, how did you get involved with the landscaping and Bill Evans? How did that come about?
Yeah. Like I was working the steam trains and the monorails, and occasionally, if the attractions had to go down, like when we were moving, building Small World and whatnot, we'd get loaned out to other parts of the park. So I ultimately worked, every attraction in the park over the 4 years of my college time. But back then, Disney, they'd had this like an 11 by 17 fold over, to an 8.5 by 11 document that was called a biographical summary. And you could fill it out, gave you, it looked like an employment thing, but, it also had information on there, are you going to school? Where are you going to school? What are you studying? What do you want to do, when you graduate? And, just some basic background information. And again, this is before computers. So everything is hard filed and hard written. So I was getting ready to graduate, and this was 1968. And I was working on the monorail, and I was up on the Tomorrowland platform, and I see Bill Evans come up the speed ramp. And Bill came out on the platform and approached the foreman, and the foreman turned around and he pointed to me, and Bill came over and he said, he introduced himself, and I said, "Yeah, Bill, I've attended the field days." And he goes, "Oh, yes, I'm sorry." He said, "Well, it says here," and he had my biographical summary.
That's amazing.
That I had filled out like 3 years before. And he said, "I understand you're a young landscape architect." And I said, "Well, I will be in about 2 weeks when I graduate." And he said, "Well, what would you think about coming up to WED and, working on this thing that we're doing in Florida?"
Oh, man.
And the project then didn't have a name. And a real name.
And did you know about it at that point?
Oh, I knew that there was a Florida project, and that's what it was called. It was called the Project.
Right.
And he said, we're would you be interested in coming up to WED and helping us with this thing we're doing in Florida? And you're not going to believe what words came out of my mouth, and now I don't either. But Bill, I said, I when I graduated, I always imagined that I'd go out and get a real job. See, because I thought, a real job was once you graduate, you go out and find, a landscape architect's office, and you get a job and you work in the office, and as and that's how you start your career. And he said, well, because to me, working at Disneyland wasn't a real job. 4 years,
Sure, yeah.
And he said, well, think about it and let me know. So I thought about it, and I went home that night. I mulled it around, and I thought, what in the world is wrong with you? So bright and early, 7 o'clock, I started calling Bill's office over in the park, and I said, count me in. And so a few weeks later, I graduated, and a couple weeks after that, Bill arranged for me to get transferred up to WED, and off we went.
That's an incredible story about him just carrying around that file. I mean, that's such a unique thing about Disney at that time. It was so people to people and anecdotal knowledge. I mean, Walt worked that way. I guess he brought in people like Bill Evans and Bruce Shellhorn similarly. But for them to keep tabs on it is just really cool. And here's this guy who's now a legend, just walking around with your file, just seeing if you wanted to work.
And it's compared to what the organization is today. I mean, it was a pretty small fraternity, or sorority, or just an organization. It was just like family,
So, what was your first kind of responsibility when you started up working on the Florida project?
Well, for the first month or two, I ended up, Bill was in Florida. He was just transitioning down to Florida. So I got, when I moved to WED, I got assigned to an art director, Fred Hope Sr. And Fred was responsible for Main Street. And so I got put to work right away on helping draft architecture details. And, I worked on the city hall and I worked on the train station. And then once, Bill got settled in Florida and he began commuting back and forth. And then I got involved in some of the early landscape designs for, Town Square and whatnot, and the Contemporary Hotel. And so, it was pretty much all over the place. And once I got sent to Florida, then it was more of a field landscape architect's role, where we were, following the project into the field and making sure that the landscape was installed per plan. And of course, that was a moving target because, again, we were like Bill in the early days with Disneyland. Florida had no nursery industry whatsoever. So we had to collect all of the large trees. And on many, many occasions, we'd drive through old sections of Orlando, Winter Park and College Park. And, if there was a nice magnolia in somebody's front yard or an oak that we thought we could move, and, we'd go up and ring the doorbell. And
that's incredible.
Is that tree too big for your house? We'd be happy to take it from you and give you $300 and plant a smaller tree for you. And that's how we collected a lot of the materials. I mean, today you can go to a nursery, whether it's in Texas or California or Florida, and there's hundreds of acres of matched trees. I mean, you can walk in and say, I need 250 live oaks that are 25 feet by 15 feet with an 8-inch caliper trunk. And you don't even have to put tags on them. You'll say, you look at one, they all look the same.
That's amazing.
250 of these. I mean, what a treat it is today, but not back then. Boy, it was incredible. We had a palm supplier one time there in Florida, and sable palms, they deliver sable palms, which was a state tree in Florida, deliver sable palms for $25 each.
Oh, wow.
And of course, we were using a lot of those in Adventureland and the Polynesian and whatnot. And one day, the guy that was a broker that we had doing the work and bringing the trees, they didn't show up. And we were on a deadline, and we looked, and we couldn't find the guy for 2 days. Turns out he'd been bringing us trees that he'd been poaching off the federal right-of-way of the Interstate 4. And he'd been doing it for months. But Florida Highway Patrolman along I-4 had stopped somebody for speeding, and while he was writing a ticket, he saw these guys back digging trees inside the federal fence.
Oh my goodness.
Called a couple other guys, and anyway. So that's where he'd been. He'd been in jail, and some crazy stuff, used to go on.
Hey, what are the, we always have to ask Californians what their first thoughts about Central Florida were upon arrival, because it was kind of the Wild West back then. Well, what did you think?
Oh, man. I'd never been any place so hot in my life. I mean, I grew up in Southern California, and I'm used to the desert and things, but it was, it seemed a little backwards at first, slow. A lot of things that just seemed to go slowly.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, back then I talked fast for everybody, and nobody could understand what I was trying to say because I was used to talking so fast and moving so fast. But the weather itself, just that first summer there, I thought I was going to die. Muggy, rain afternoon, every afternoon at 4.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
And you come out and you look up and the sun's still like way up overhead, and then the humidity and the heat just goes sky high. And yeah, first time I ever heard this was in Florida. Living in Florida is like nothing between Orlando and hell but a screen door.
I like that. I'm going to use that. Yeah.
Oh, where did they set you up while you were waiting or while you were working there?
Down in Florida?
Yeah.
Yeah, Bill, we were on the original tree farm. You know, Charlie Sepulveda, who had worked for Bill, his landscape superintendent at Disneyland, Charlie was sent down early to start what was called the experimental tree farm. And they shipped, a number of common varieties of trees, common to California, down to Florida. And Charlie got them all planted in the original experimental tree farm because, there wasn't a whole lot of information available about, what good trees could be relied upon, what we call backbone trees,
Mm-hmm.
various species of oaks and elms and, things that would create park-like settings. And so Charlie was down there and they had the tree farm set up there just at the edge of Reams Road at the north gate, the north edge of the property.
Okay.
It's a parking lot, but Charlie set that up and we had a couple of office trailers there within that compound. And I had an office in that same trailer with Bill and Charlie. And so that was our home base. We had a purchasing agent in there with us, and we could run our purchasing needs through. And Doyle Jones was the construction superintendent then, and so.
Yeah, that tree farm has interested me. It's in a lot of, Bill does a lot of tours of it for the Orlando Sentinel back then.
Right.
That was like kind of the first things they built on property, so it was
correct.
Like high interest. Yeah, can you tell us anything else about that facility and what it was like?
It was a very clean setup, nice setup, and we kept track. We kept records of what struggled and what exceeded our expectations and what didn't make it. And at the same time, we'd been out collecting these dooryard trees, and we needed a place to hold them. And we soon ran out of room there on the original farm. So we started clearing some other little pockets of high ground around the property that for tree storage areas. And once we'd have these large trees, they come out of the ground with a root ball 4 feet deep or something. And
Mm-hmm.
so rather than dig holes and put them in the ground, we just plop them, set them on the ground, and then we pile dirt up around the root ball.
Oh, interesting.
And so they were literally sitting above ground, but with lots of dirt around it with a tree ring. And we had a water truck, 2 water trucks actually, that would come around and water these things. And so we filled 4 tree storage areas during construction was going on in preparation for us moving onto the site once areas became available.
Wow.
Plant. Some of the areas, berm work and things, we got started early, and Tom Sawyer's Island, we got started early, and the Jungle Cruise, we got started early. But, most of the park work, we didn't really get into that until, 10 months before opening.
Holy
Wow.
smokes.
Jeez.
10 to 11 months before opening, when we really started cranking on planning the park.
You talked about finding higher elevations to plant the trees. That wasn't very easy down here in Florida, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Higher elevation is a relative term.
Well, it is. It is. When you think about a town called Mount Dora, Florida, it's what is it, 30 feet above water, the sea level,
Right.
In the middle of the state. So,
I just wonder if you could talk really about what daily life was like on the site in Florida, because I know it's such a difference from California. Such an interesting time and place. Just any memories of daily life on the work site?
Sure. When things, this was at the time when construction was going full tilt. It was the largest single site construction project on the planet. And, before we went 24 hours, on a normal work day, everything would get cranked up between 6:30 and 7 in the morning. And most of the construction would end at 3:30 or 4. But there was so much activity on the site. You could drive, like I said, our office, our compound and tree farm were up on the north edge of the site. And, if we had to go down across the site, by site, I'm talking about the Magic Kingdom site, say down to the town square, say, for example. If we had to cut through the site, they had these construction roads every place, and you could go this way, and they had people making, flagmen, right down through all this construction activity. And you're driving past bulldozers, and they're driving past you, and turnip poles, and motor graders, and all this. Just a tremendous amount of work. You might be down toward the town square for about 5 or 10 minutes, and you come back to, backtrack and follow the same route back. Nope, sorry, that's changed. No, you can't go that way anymore. It's, that's how fast things changed during construction. So access change, and, it just was amazing how the site came together.
Was it difficult for you guys to find sufficient manpower in Florida to meet the scale of the landscaping needs?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it was. It was always a struggle, and it was even a bigger struggle to find. Not just the labor. We seemed to have enough labor, but what was hard was finding good, like field foremen. Guys who knew how to run a crew and drive a crew and could read a set of plans. That's what kept me busy the most was just hopping around, making sure that, the crews were following the plans. And we had one fella we'd hired who was a nurseryman, and he professed to know all about plants and whatnot. And we were planting Tom Sawyer's Island. And we were planting 7-gallon pine trees, small pine trees.
Mm-hmm.
Tom Sawyer's Island really didn't open to the public till 1973. So we had, of course, there was no water in the river, so all the trucks would run down into the river bottom, and they'd offload all the plants and pull them up on the berms, and they were planting. And so I checked in with him in the morning, and oh yeah, no, don't worry, don't bother me. I was 22 at the time, and everybody on the site seemed like they were older than me.
Sure, yeah.
And don't bother me, boy. Get back in your car and leave. So I come back to the site, or come back down to Tom Sawyer's Island about midday, and instead of planting those trees, those pines, plumb straight up and down on the slopes of Tom Sawyer's Island, he had planted them perpendicular to the grade. They look like rockets, or wild hair on a dog's back. They're all
like a porcupine.
Like a porcupine. And I thought, that's it. You're done. I canned him right then and there. So we had a hard time finding, qualified field leadership help like that, field foreman.
That just indicates to me, you talk about your age at the time, and this is something we hear from people who were young when Epcot was happening. Mm-hmm. They would really delegate a lot of responsibility to very young people. If they trusted you, you had a lot of important business in your hands.
Correct. and I mean, not just a lot of money, a lot of business, but a lot of money.
Oh yeah.
Responsibility and especially, and you're working toward a deadline. I've never known another company to do that. Of course, my primary life's career was with Disney, and that's the way. Literally, that's the way I was raised professionally.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You search for the talent, you find the talent, and once you hire the talent, then you groom the talent.
Mm.
And, for me, other young landscape architects, as Bill retired and I was promoted, and I would interview young landscape architects. I was more interested in whether or not they were coachable. Were they malleable? Could they learn?
Sure.
Or would they just have their own ideas and march to their own drum? Because that wouldn't work at Disney. I mean, you all have to be on the same sheet of music.
Right.
To use Bill's, symphony analogy. So,
well, we've talked a lot about Bill Evans. What was he like? What were your impressions of him?
Bill was like a second father to me. He was patient. I mean, and I go back to how young I was. So patient, and he was a great coach. He was a great mentor. He had a great sense of humor and an encyclopedic mind, photographic memory, an encyclopedic mind about horticulture and plants and he was just so willing to teach and coach and bring young guys like me along.
Was there anyone else you worked with early on who was particularly memorable or influential on you?
I got to know Chuck Mile pretty well.
Okay.
You know that name?
Yes, from his tombstone at the Haunted Mansion.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, Chuck was the art director, the managing art director on the project, all of Walt Disney World.
Oh, wow.
So he was responsible. He was responsible. He came out of WED in Glendale as well, and Chuck was the senior art director, on-site art director. And I got acquainted with Chuck, and he was, again, just a wonderful, wonderful guy. And you look back over the legends and all of them, whether it's it's Herbie Ryman or X or Orlando or Zovich, and they're just all cut out of the same fabric. They're just fantastic human beings and professionals.
That's interesting. That's good to hear. And from the people we've talked to, it seems that it seems to be pretty universally held high opinions of these people.
So, the property was so vastly different in the scope from that of Disneyland, and there were a lot of resources, and we've mentioned the water, the elevation, the challenges on site. How did the team wrap their heads around a site that large as far as planning landscaping and identifying resources that could be of use?
Well, while the property was very large, 28,000 acres, I mean, we had, for us within the landscape division, we had the site was put together as a master plan, for transportation from 1 to up the north-south road. We always call it, back then there were, two paved roads. There was a north-south road and an east-west road.
Right.
That's the way they were called. And, but, each element within the overall master plan had a landscape component. And, you just can't eat an elephant in one bite. I mean, we worked where we were able to have access, and it was more than once where we would, we'd have to work in phases. We could, install some trees, then we'd have to back away. And 2 months later, when some other construction phases were finished, and we could come back in with the shrubs and ground covers and things like that. So, it was a very interesting experience and learning experiences, especially as it relates to strategy, and construction.
Sure.
We had to, we coordinated with the Kitchen brothers who installed the monorail pylons and beams, and that was a separate contract altogether. And because, once the last beam went in, we couldn't, there's a limit to what we could bring into the park sky high.
Oh, true.
So, and where was the last beam going to be placed, and when was it going to be placed? And, we had to be in ahead of that. And another example was the Polynesian Hotel atrium. We had to have all those coconut palms, large palms, 2-story tall palms, into that atrium before they closed the front of the building up.
Mm.
Yeah.
And when does when do they move from structural steel to beginning to put the glazing and the intermediate steel up? Because it had to be between those two dates. And if you didn't, you weren't going to get it in. You weren't going to get it in. So.
And all without modern computing and.
Exactly. I was just going to say that. Yeah. Unbelievable. They could pull that off. And then losing the contractor halfway through. But did you find many, and obviously the famed example of this is the Liberty Oak. Did you find many things on site that you could move around and use? And
a few. Of course, most notable is of course the Liberty Oak tree, and you guys have seen pictures of that, right?
Oh yes, yeah. Talk about that process. That had to have been I don't know, a leap of imagination, I guess you would say.
Well, it was interesting because we knew we couldn't move. We knew we needed a Liberty Oak. We knew that. And we knew that we couldn't, if we found one in a pasture down in Plant City, down toward Tampa, our chances of getting it over the road was, not very high. So we began looking around the property. And again, the property was 28,000 acres. And so down in the south end of the property, we happened upon this really quite nice live oak. It was about 125 years old back then. And it was out in the middle of a pasture. And so that became a candidate. And we found a few more. And Bill finally made the selection. He said, well, let's make it this one. And so once we made that decision, the first thing we did is we root pruned it and left it in the ground. And do you guys know what root pruning is?
Yeah, it's like where you cut basically you cut off the roots into a smaller ball and leave it just there for a little bit. Is that right? Yeah.
You cut down through the roots around the tree. And, it was 16 or 18 feet diameter. And so we root pruned the tree and left it sit for about a year. And
oh, wow.
And let it heal. We backfilled with sand and pine straw or pine sawdust. And, we just let it heal itself. And then we came back and, let's see, I'm trying to get these dates right. We moved the tree from the pasture to a temporary location over on what was a big open piece of ground. On all the drawings back then, it was called Thunder Mesa. It's not Big Thunder Mountain, where Big Thunder Mountain sits. Well, it was a big old flat area next to the river there. And so we set it took it over there and set it there and piled dirt up around it like we were doing with all the trees and storage area and so forth. And it sat there until moving day. Moving day, as I recall, was March of 71. And we couldn't, there was enough construction around Frontierland Street. The shortest distance between 2 points was the way we had to take it. So we built a ramp, big dirt ramp down into rivers of America. And we built a big ramp up just south of out of the river, just south of the riverboat landing there in Liberty Square. And that seemed to be, as you look at a map of the proper of Magic Kingdom, that's the shortest distance between 2 points, about 400 feet. And the decision was made not to put it on a truck and try to do that. Decision was made we'd have a 55-ton hydrostick crane pick the tree up and walk it that 500.
Oh wow!
Down
Gosh.
that. And I've got a picture of the day we planted it. Maybe you've seen it. I don't know. There in Liberty Square. I'm in that photo. This particular photo. I'll send
that's great.
Yeah.
If you want me to send that to you, I'll send it.
Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
So what we ended up doing, that's what we did. We walked that thing, and just not long after we got it off the ground at Thunder Mesa, the crane operator, the balance got away from him, and he dropped the tree. It was only about 3 or 4 feet off the ground, but he dropped the tree and broke the root ball on one side. And there we were.
Did everybody just have a heart attack simultaneously?
We all looked at each other, and we had no backup, so we had to move on. So we kept the movement going, and it was 5 hours to walk that tree 500 feet.
Oh, good grief.
Before we had it
Gosh.
finally in location and faced the way we wanted it, and in. And so we began right once it was planted, and it had to be there because the building behind it, which was the silversmith shop and the antique shop and whatnot, if that was built, we'd never get in there the way it was set up. So they built that building around that tree, but we were concerned about the condition of the root ball and whether or not someday we'd have to come back and remove that Liberty oak tree in pieces like firewood. But we decided that what we'd do is we'd monitor the crown of the tree, the leaves on the crown of the tree, for the next 6 or 8 months to see if there was some loss of growth potential on the broken side of the root ball. And as it turned out, the west side of the crown wasn't growing as heartily as the east side of the crown of the tree, the leaves on the east side of the tree. And so we took a couple of branches, I think 5 of them originally, we rooted a couple of small branches, maybe ½ inch in diameter, oak branches. And we got them rooted at the tree farm. And we came back out to the Liberty oak tree, and we planted those 5 oak branches in the top of the root ball, on the broken root ball side.
Okay.
We planted those new roots, and then we grafted the other end of those little branches into the cambium layer of the tree, the big trunk. It's about 2 feet in diameter.
Sure.
So you had these little branches growing, bridging, and that's what it's called, is an oak root bridge, bridging. And what that was doing then was providing the nutrients from the new roots of the little branches into the cambium layer on the side of the tree that was suffering a loss of growth. And they were in place for probably 5 years until the root ball itself had recovered itself from the damage, and then those were removed. So,
that is remarkable.
But that's what saved that tree.
That is just incredible to me, and it has survived to this day and thrived,
Yes.
I assume.
Yes.
How much aftercare did that? I mean, that is obviously a big deal, but was there anything else you had to do over the years to keep it healthy?
No, they pretty much maintenance. They've got a really wonderful grounds maintenance crew there, and they don't allow sphagnum moss to grow in it.
Mm.
Although it's not parasitic. Sphagnum moss is not parasitic to its host. It's saprophytic, but we've never wanted to have sphagnum moss in the tree. That's a southern thing.
Sure.
Mhm.
The Liberty oak is from the Northeast, so
That's remarkable.
it wouldn't fit the theme. Sphagnum moss wouldn't fit the theme.
Another challenge early on, according to what I've read, is the winters in Central Florida significantly colder than one in California. So there was more dealing with climate than Disney had encountered before. What was that like? And I've heard about these cold tests that Bill would do. Can you tell us something about that?
Well, we did, yeah. It would get cold in Southern California, and Bill was for years had used smudge pots in the Jungle Cruise at Disneyland.
Mm.
Just like they use smudge pots in the orange groves in Southern California and even in Florida. And we did some cold testing with the University of Florida Ag Department up there, and testing various types of gas heaters and their efficiencies. Mm. And so when we built the jungle, we plumbed the jungle with gas lines, natural gas, so that we could put gas heaters in the jungle to protect from the cold. Now, in the early 80s, we had, I think, two years apart, but back to back, just bone crunching cold. I mean, caused millions and millions of dollars worth of damage, to Adventureland and the Polynesian. I mean, they were devastating. And Epcot was a newly planted project back then as well.
So did that heater system would just snap on whenever it got cold, and did they actually use it?
They were fired. They had to be started.
Uh-huh.
We had, like a hurricane crew. We had a frost crew, and they had to be started. And we used the same system, a bit modified, with a little more knowledge later on at Tokyo Disneyland, and the jungle was there.
Oh, okay.
That's amazing. Another challenge was that we heard a lot from Evans later on was that they fill in the Magic Kingdom with the fill from what would become the Seven Seas Lagoon, and it became inverted, so clay was on top.
Correct.
How much of a problem was that, and how was that dealt with?
Oh, it was a terrible problem. You can imagine, you take this marley clay, which is at the bottom of Seven Seas Lagoon, and it was placed on the Magic Kingdom site, and it was placed on what became the Grand Floridian site, the Polynesian Hotel site, the old Venetian site. Nothing's been built there. It was on the TTC, Ticket and Transportation Center site. And then you take it and you compact it to 98% so you can build on it, right?
Right.
Well, that's like trying to plant in asphalt or concrete.
Yeah, right.
And of course, that decision was made, that was a financial decision. That decision was made to not, bring, good dirt from someplace, take that ugly stuff out and bring good material in. It was, you had these sites, just go ahead and take all that gunk out of the lake and pound it down so it's so hard you could, drive cars on it. And then you had to plant in it. And so once you do, and that stuff, and if you talk to Bill, I'm sure he said the same thing. It was like planting in a teacup,
Right.
You plant a plant in a teacup and expect it to drain. Well, that's not going to happen. And we learned the hard way. When the first planting of every specimen tree, we did once we got the hole prepared, we'd bring a big auger and we'd auger down as far as we could, trying to break through that hard pan. And sometimes we were able and sometimes we weren't. And but we'd always try to do our best, and we used vertical drain pipe with inspection caps so that we could see if water was, getting up around the root ball of the tree. And My guess is we replaced, before opening, we replaced 80% of the specimen trees in the Magic Kingdom.
Golly.
At least once.
Oh.
And here's a funny story. One night we were replacing the two oak trees that you see in many photographs on either side of the castle,
Right.
in the hub, out near the street, or the hub street. But they're the two main. I mean, we had done our best to find two matched trees, and they both drowned in that mess. And so we're replacing them just before opening, and so the pub is paved, and trees are planted, and the lights are on, and we're digging these trees up. And it's 2:30 in the morning. We're working by work light, and we get these trees out, and just as we're pulling the tree out, I'm backing up to get away from what I know is coming, which is a stench.
Oh no!
Anaerobic stench out of this hole as this thing sucks these trees out of the ground, and you can hear them. And so I backed up to the curb, and I stepped off the curb, and I bumped into something. I turned around, and here was Dick Nunes.
Oh no!
With a golf cart, and sitting next to him in the front seat is Roy Disney.
Oh, wow.
Oh my goodness.
And Edna's behind him. His wife Edna's behind him. Now this is 2:30 in the morning. And and about that time that tree comes out of the ground, out it comes, and within a few seconds that stench hits us, And Dick's waving his hand in front of his face, and Roy grabs his nose. And I just remember seeing that image of the chief financial officer of the company, who had probably been part of the decision not to bring good soil in,
Right.
to reap the benefits of a financial decision that he'd probably been a part of.
The karma payback finally came around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to wonder what in the world Roy and especially Edna were doing out at 2:30 in the morning driving around.
Oh, Roy was, they'd fly in and the radios. If they flew in the afternoon, he was going to be on the site that night. You couldn't keep him from it. He was a wonderful guy. Wonderful guy.
Oh, that's interesting.
And he was just so motivated to make sure that the project got done, and following the construction, and he was just a great guy.
We always like to hear stories about him because you rarely do hear stories about him, but he was so important.
Very vitally important. And if you're interested, I can tell you another Roy story.
Oh,
please.
absolutely.
Probably a month or 6 weeks later, after this incident with the trees, Bill and I were in the office up there in the tree farm, and it was after construction had quit for the day. And it was amazing how once the equipment stopped running, you're up there at the north end of the property, there wasn't a sound. It was just so quiet and peaceful. And Bill and I would always end the day, we'd spend the last hour and a half or 2 hours making the plans for the next day's work and making sure we had everything that we needed, and crews were queued up, and we're ready to hit the ground running at 6 or 6:30 in the morning. And so we hear a car pull into the compound. We had gravel driveways and parking area there. So we hear this car pull in, and then a few minutes later, we hear these feet shuffling on the wood deck outside, and the trailer door open. And I'm sitting across the desks, faced each other, and Bill's faced the door of the office, and I was facing toward Bill. I didn't see who came in, and so Bill looks up. We hear footsteps coming in through the office, and Bill looks up and he goes, "Hey, Roy, how are you?" I turn around and it's Roy Disney. And he's got on a pair of khakis and some boots and open collar shirt. And he says, "Come on in, Roy." He says, "You know Scotty, right?" And I go, "Oh, yeah, good to see you, Scott." And so Roy sat down in a folding chair next to me, a metal chair sitting next to me. And I offered him my office chair, my desk chair. And he said, no, I got this. He sat there. So we were talking, they chit chat, and Bill lived across the street. Bill lived in Bay Hill, and he lived across the street from the Disney cottages there. And Roy and Edna's had one of those cottages that the company kept for them whenever they were in and out of town. So Bill and his wife, Jane, they were on social gathering status with Roy and Edna when they were in town. So they were very close friends. And so they had a little family chit chat. How's everybody? How's this? How's that? And finally, Roy said, "Look," he said, I don't want to bother you guys too long. He said, "But I'm on my way to New York next week to get some money, enough money to finish this project. And I need to know how much more money, you guys need to finish the landscape. Because we need to finish this project, and we're going to finish it on time. And I want to make sure we've got enough money." So Bill, we've been thinking about how much more we needed. I think our budget for that whole project at the time was $4.2 million, I think.
Oh, wow.
Just in landscape, and which was a lot of money back then.
Sure.
And Bill said, "Roy, I think we could probably use another 450, 500,000. He says, "Now, are you sure? Because I can't go back again." And Bill said, "No." He said, I think 500,000. That's a number I seem to remember. He said, "I think 500,000 will do it." And I remember it like it was yesterday. Roy just said, he leaned back in that chair, tipped that chair back, and he looked up at the ceiling, and he says, "I just got to make sure we finish this project, Bill." He said, "I just don't know that I can face Walt."
Wow.
Wow.
So he said, we've got to finish this project. We are going to finish it. And so what he did is he went to New York and he borrowed some money on a medium-term loan at a certain interest rate. And I don't know if it was Chase Manhattan or who he borrowed the money from, but first thing he did is he turned around and he loaned that money on shorter term loans at higher rates.
Brilliant.
And when the bank found out, they were pretty upset.
I'm sure.
And they wanted to call the loan, and he said, they said, you said you were going to use this money to finish the park. And he says, "I am. I'm going to use every dime of it, plus the added interest."
Oh, wow.
Finish the park. And you're going to get your money. And
wow.
That was the way that ended.
It just it never fails to amaze me when I read about, the business, how he funded all this stuff. Just this pretty uneducated guy from the Midwest, and just a genius, an absolute genius at working the system to fund all these things.
Just down to earth, just salt of the earth kind of guy, and level-headed. He's just a wonderful, wonderful guy.
And talking to like when we talked to Frank Stanek, he was talking about, we as fans, you think about what didn't get built and how, they had all these plans and all this stuff, but it's an incredible feat that they could financially get all of it, because Disney didn't make that much money back then. To do that, I think that was as much as they made in like 4 years, all pumped into this one thing. That's a huge risk.
Well, yeah, and you think about, money that was diverted from other things within the company to help fund this effort, and deferred maintenance at Disneyland, and production at the studios slowed. they did a lot of things to kind of, tighten their belt, on the corporate side to help, mitigate the hemorrhaging of the cash to get the project done.
Right. You mentioned Dick Nunes, who is quite a character in his own right. And we always hear about this story about him having everybody out there planting sod outside the Contemporary the night before the opening. So were you there, and what was that scene like?
Well, we were laying sod all over the property.
Sure, right.
And Dick was always famous for, wherever he'd see a sod crew, he'd always yell out, "Green side up!" Thinking, who in their right mind would want to throw sod? Are they smart enough to throw it green side up? But that really was quite an effort, to get that sod down around that hotel. There was so much of it, and even that morning, we worked overnight through the night, crews going everywhere, and we were even polishing off the Magic Kingdom, inside the project and inside the Magic Kingdom, and washing down the streets and just getting out of the way at sunrise on opening morning.
Wow!
Still had tractors and trucks and whatnot in the park, and I look back now at pictures, just opening day pictures of the landscape and the hub and other areas, and you can still see the seams in the sod. Those pictures, and I just cringe, thinking, I can't believe we opened looking this way. But I remember that morning, looking around, and there was no more dirt. It was either plants or sod, and I thought, this is pretty cool. This is pretty cool.
Yeah, considering where it came from, I mean, our parents went down, I don't know, was it 74, Michael? It was years later, but all their pictures of property, outside the park, it's just sod everywhere. Like the Contemporary, just tons and tons of sod. I mean, thinking about how much of, resources went into that is pretty impressive to transform the swamp,
Yeah, and roadsides, all the roadsides, had
right.
sod put on it, and some of the outer areas we did some seed and straw, but a lot of sod, a lot of sod.
Well, one of the true gems of the property, from a horticultural standpoint, is the Polynesian. And Bill Evans had a particular green thumb with exotic plants. This
Correct.
Seems like this would have been one the team would have wanted to get just right.
Well, and we certainly did. And like you say, Bill was a genius with tropical plants, and the plant palette that was developed. Every part of the project, you develop a plant palette, list of plants that you can draw on that complements and accentuates the theme and supports the theme. And Bill was a genius when it came to the tropical and subtropical plants. He had a colleague, Griff Griffith. Griff was, you've heard of Griffith Park?
Of course.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Well, Griff's dad was the Griffith that gave that land. It was all Griffith, part of Griffith Holdings, property holdings in California, Los Angeles.
Wow.
Gave that land for Griffith Park. And Griff he was a contemporary of Bill's, and he was a plantsman. And he wasn't just any plantsman. I mean, this guy had been into South America and jungles and Africa, and he knew all of everything. So Bill flew Griff down when we were going to do the atrium, the final planting in the atrium in the Polynesian lobby. He got a list of plants from Griff. He said, "What would you plant in there?" He sent him a copy of the plan, and so he'd know how much square footage he was dealing with. And Griff sent a list of plants. God, we had to go to Miami, and I mean, I think we went down in the Caribbean for some of them too. And we got everything that we thought we could get our hands on for Griff. And he took that plan and he threw it away. The planting plan we'd done. Of course, the big trees, the coconuts and areca palms and everything, all the specimen stuff was already in. And this is just maybe a week or two before opening.
Holy cow.
Polynesian. So we had a crew dedicated to help Griff. And he took, I mean, we had just pallets of material. And he took all of that weird oddball stuff and he planted that without a plan. He had it in his head and he planted that atrium.
Oh my gosh.
Incredible.
And yeah. Most of it's still there. They've removed a few pockets. Well, they've removed the whole atrium, as you guys probably know.
Right.
But before that, they removed a few pockets close to the edge of the planter for seasonal planting. Some poinsettias at Christmas and lilies in the spring and things like that. But tropical lilies and so forth. But the overall planting of the atrium was all the really sexy stuff Griffith did for that.
That is a fascinating story because I'd always wondered how that atrium was really one of my favorite places in all of Walt Disney World. It really was. Yeah. And, I had wondered, who was responsible for all that? Yeah.
Well, Griff was the brainchild of everything, all the small stuff. And Fred Jerger cut all the waterfall structure. That's behind all that black feather rock facing. That was all cast in place concrete, the pump structure and whatnot for the waterfalls.
Interesting.
But yeah. Came in and he cut all the feather rock and with a crew and set the feather rock facing on that cast in place concrete structure. And so he built the waterfalls. And Fred Jerger's name, right?
Right. I was going to ask about him because I assumed that your teams would have to probably work really closely with him, right?
Oh yeah.
He sounds like he was a character.
Fred was, to say the least. He was fun.
Yeah.
Fun.
Well, another of our favorite areas down there is Fort Wilderness, which is obviously meant to look like a wild environment, but which required a great deal of landscaping thought. Could you talk a little about that project?
Fort Wilderness was, I think kind of it was on the cutting edge of campgrounds. You had an established campground that you were going to, try to get as many sites in as you could and as many loops as you could and still keep a wild environment. It was very interesting. It was the way they cleared the roadways and the streets, the loop roads and the campsites. Was a lot like the way they clear through virgin forest for golf courses. You had a line and they'd pull everything down from into the center of the loop road and haul it out that way and do as little damage as possible as the project was being built. And it really became wildly popular. I mean, and campers are, they're a breed unto themselves.
That's true. Yep.
People who camp, they're a breed unto themselves. And word spread like wildfire. Once you had a few seasons of guest stay in the campground. Because the loops and the campsites, you wanted to have as much vegetation between campsites as possible. And so everybody could enjoy a nice camping environment, whether you were in a 50-foot Prevost or a tent, it didn't matter. But then, you moved from that environment, up toward the trading post and Marshmallow Marsh and some of those fun places for the families in the evenings and canoeing and then the all famous Fort Wilderness Railroad.
Yes.
Yes.
So
Long
course,
lamented Fort Wilderness Railroad.
yeah, and then of course River Country. The country's, the nation's first water park. So yeah, it was a hopping place to be.
Yeah, there really was a lot of innovation over there. I had read where campgrounds of that era, you wouldn't back out your RV. You'd have a loop where you could drive out on the other side, but they didn't do that because they didn't want to just spoil that much of the forest.
Correct.
They wanted to keep as much of it there as possible, which is
correct.
Great.
Yeah.
Speaking of kind of revolutionary practices, one of the things we often talk about is the number of prototype systems involved in Walt Disney World, baked in from the very beginning. That's another great Roy legacy, that they put this much of that kind of Walt Epcot ethos into a lot of things. And so there's a bunch in the landscaping field. There's, all kinds of integrated pest management, water management, this water hyacinth project, all kinds of revolutionary planning practices. What were some of the challenges and systems that you were most intrigued by as a kind of younger landscaper?
Well, I thought, some of the research that we were doing to replace, paper pulp, replacing pine pulp with eucalyptus pulp. And because eucalyptus grows at 3 or 4 times the speed of a palm or a pine tree. So, we did some research. I don't know how many acres we probably did 60 or 70 acres, planted 60 or 70 acres of eucalyptus, 2 or 3 different species of eucalyptus, and then harvested it and had it pulped. And that was an experiment that we fooled with for probably 5 or 6 years. The downside, as it turned out, of course, you never know without research. The downside was the pulp. They used the pulp for like tissue, Kleenex tissue kind of thing, and it was like blowing your nose with sandpaper, because the eucalyptus, doesn't really grow in rings per se, like a hardwood tree, like a pine or oak or something. It's very fibrous, twisted hardwood inside.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Don't know if you've ever tried to split eucalyptus, but it's like trying to split a concrete fence post.
Gosh.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I read an article one time where they said that they were considering doing eucalyptus coal. Do you remember that?
I do not.
That's just wild. I've never heard of that. I was like, okay.
Well, it's hard enough. Let me write that down. I want to look into that because, it's a tough wood. I mean, it's really hard.
Yeah, well, this was just such a feature of the time. I think as we were growing up as kids, you would hear a lot of these behind the scene things that they were doing down there. Jeff mentioned that water hyacinth program, which was really highly touted. How long did that run?
Oh gosh, seems to me it was 5 or 6 years, maybe.
Okay.
I can't be sure.
Sure. It's just one of those things that they always seemed very proud of. These projects that were kind of running in the, not theme park things, but other things that were going on.
Yeah, and one of the things that we began to realize too was the amount of fertilizer that is used on a project like that, and we began to realize or observe that even along the roadways where we had no irrigation and, we really didn't fertilize that much, just roadways, like the north-south road, World Drive now. We watched and we'd have a little bit of rain And, you know, if the grass, it was Argentine Bahia, roadside grass, would be become a little dormant in the hot period of the year, and even in the wintertime, it might dormant out just a bit. But a little bit of rain, you know, would fall, and the grass would turn green. But it wasn't really because of moisture, which it would revitalize the grass for sure. But the grass would turn green because there was just enough acid in the rain to unlock the micronutrients in whatever fertilizer or natural nutrients it was the plant was picking up. So we began to think about how much fertilizer could we save by, you know, throwing fertilizer on the ground if we could inject some level of sulfuric acid into the irrigation system.
Oh, wow.
And unlock all those micronutrients, not, you know, your major elements, you know, your NPKs is one thing, but all your micronutrients is really where you get your long-term growth and health. And so we did a lot of research on you know, that, and you know, we did a few experiments, but they, you know, we didn't really follow all the way through property wide with it, but it certainly showed some promise, and like the IPM program, I mean, it's so vitally important. You know, there's going to come a day when, you know, you're not going to be allowed to throw chemicals on the ground anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so it only makes sense to have this stepped approach. That's, you know, approach. You know, you use chemicals at the very last, as the last resort to battle something. I mean, you certainly have passive activities, physical activities like pruning, you know, damaged and infested materials from a plant, and then you have soaps and oils, and then you have the predator, you know, good bugs versus bad bugs. You know, those are all natural. Those are all fairly passive, and then you can always drop back to a chemical if you need it. But IPM is absolutely changed the game, I think, especially there on the property.
It sure has. And I mean, when you think of, you know, anywhere else, you go in Florida where bugs are such a problem, but yeah, you don't even think about it at Disney World just because it's not, you know, as a guest, it's not a problem at all. It's remarkable.
Yeah. And we try to use, you know, within horticulture, we always tried to use the teaching moment. You know, we had one of our pest control techs is a very engaging guy. We put him in a little cargo cart with ladybugs all over it, and he became Dr. Ladybug. He had a white lab coat, and they do ladybug releases for guests, for kids at hotels. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
Oh, that's fun. That's nice.
You know, we'd take these, you know, matchboxes. You buy regular matchbox, and when you can buy ladybugs by the bag, and you keep them in the refrigerator, and they kind of go to sleep and become dormant. So then you can put 6 or 8 ladybugs in a matchbook, in a matchbox, and then we put a ladybug sticker on top of it. And so, you know, Dr. Ladybug would take 200 or 300 of these matchbooks full of ladybugs, and he'd have a group of kids and adults and talk about good bugs, bad bugs, and ladybugs, of course, eat aphids and things like that. And so it was a great environmental message, and the kids loved it. And then they'd all go outside and do a ladybug release in the garden.
That's
outside
great.
the hotels. So
That's a lot of fun.
yeah.
One of the things, another thing that was always really featured in early publicity for the resort was the topiary program. How did topiary become such a signature element of Walt Disney World? I know in those early days, they were used to decorate, I think of the area between the TTC and the Contemporary, you know, a lot of areas.
Yeah, we brought that from Disneyland. The original topiaries figures, the bent armatures, and they were grown in boxes, and they were specifically grown at Disneyland for. There was going to be a topiary garden of the gods.
Mm.
Ken Anderson designed it, and it was a walk-through attraction, and whimsical, dancing hippos and alligators and different figures, and so that was going to be just a little sidebar walking attraction up on the north end of Fantasyland near the old Fantasyland Railroad Station.
Yeah.
Disneyland. And this was before Small World. And so there was no place backstage where to put these boxes. There were probably 12 or 15 of them, these figures. And so they were placed along on a gravel area just before you arrive at the train would arrive at the Fantasyland train station. And there was a bit of the spiel on the train. I remember giving the spiel about, these topiary figures for the topiary garden of the gods and all this stuff.
Wow. And
along came Small World, and that was the end of topiary garden of the gods. But those topiary figures were used. If you look at pictures of the queue area at load and unload area at Small World at Disneyland, all those figures are still there. They were planted in that area. So they became a huge photo op, and guests loved them and so forth. So when Charlie went to Florida to start the tree farm, we had sent some armatures, topiary figure armatures down, and he had some boxes made, and so he started growing topiaries there. And so within the landscape plan, we decided we'd use those at the monorail station at the Ticket and Transportation Center. And if you look at early photographs, you'll see those topiary figures on that slope in front of the monorail station in the TTC. And so they were there at opening. And what they quickly found out was that, the monorails and the watercraft couldn't handle the guests quick enough, for people coming and arriving, the arrival sequence in the morning. So, of course, they had the trams. Well, the tram, was, if you got on the tram, you ride the tram anywhere.
Right.
You're going down this road and under the water bridge. The most interesting thing along the whole tram route was the water bridge. And you're going underneath a bunch of water and through the bridge, and you get to the main gate of the Magic Kingdom. So Dick Nunes wanted more topiary. Well, you just can't snap your fingers.
Right.
You got to grow. This stuff takes 3, 4, 5 years to grow and mature. So he decides they were going to manufacture or make these things out of plastic. So all those topiary figures along the tram route were all plastic.
Fascinating. Yeah.
And then we couldn't keep the guests from, like the guests that were leaving the Contemporary would go, back past this area. And of course, it's a farewell photo. They'd all climb up on the elephants. There was a mama elephant, three trailing elephants holding trunk to tail.
Uh-huh.
So all the kids would crawl up on these things, and pretty soon they were breaking these figures down.
Oh my gosh.
So they were always having to be updated and whatnot. And Tony Virginia came up with a kind of a cute idea. A lot of the utilities, main utilities, hot and cold supply lines and so forth, steam lines run right along that tram route. And there was always a steam leak coming up out of the ground at one point. They couldn't get it sealed. So Tony took an alligator, one of those plastic alligators, and they ran a pipe PVC pipe down in the ground and captured that steam and ran it up the rear end of that gator and stood him there and ran the pipe out its mouth. It was a standing gator with steam coming out of its mouth,
Oh, that's fun. Yeah, they made quite an impression. Whenever you look at people's old trip photos from that era, old vacation slides, it seems like everybody took photos of those.
Everybody took photos of that. Yeah.
Everybody took photos of that, and they would take photos of Flower Street on Main Street, the flower market on Main Street.
Yeah.
Well, we've talked a lot about the first phase of Walt Disney World. Were there any other achievements in that first phase you feel are really significant?
Oh gosh, well, they were, after the park opened, there was really not much of a Tomorrowland around. I think that Tom Sawyer's Island opened, I think, in '73.
Mm-hmm.
And there was just such a huge demand that there was more capacity needed. So, they finally brought Pirates of the Caribbean and down there in Caribbean Plaza, and that connected a big wraparound loop then from Adventureland down through Pirates of the Caribbean and down into Frontierland. That was, I think, for Christmas of '73. If I remember correctly.
That sounds right. Yeah.
On the east side, there's Space Mountain. They finished up Space Mountain in '75. So, the park they just continued to pour money into the park. And I went from being a field landscape architect to a resident landscape architect, because Bill went back to California, which, my original deal was, come help us in a few years and, we'll bring you back to California. Well, Bill moved back to California to wed, and he was forced into retirement in '75. They had a 65 age limit. So he had to retire in '75.
Oh, that's unbelievable that they would intentionally lose that level of talent.
So I became a resident landscape architect and kind of took on his mantle, and because all the money, all the development on the property was coming to Florida. They really weren't doing much of anything else. And then in '78, they made the announcement about Epcot, so they shipped me back to Florida or back to California to head up that effort. And first thing I did was I got Bill under retainer.
Right.
So that I had access to his brain, and so we had fun. We, of course, 6 months after we started Epcot, and we'd signed the deal with Mitsui, the Japanese, to do Tokyo Disneyland, and we did those two projects parallel tracks, 6 months apart,
which is just amazing. So then in the '70s, Disney moves on to building Lake Buena Vista, and this is kind of a favorite place of ours growing up. That was our resort first. It's also a test bed of urban design for Disney. How did the considerations change for this area as compared to what Disney had tackled up until then?
Well, it was a very interesting story. I mean, I think initially there was some consideration that Lake Buena Vista would be the residential community of Disney World. In other words, perhaps a wink and a nod toward Walt's original Epcot,
right,
where you live and work, in a community and so forth. Well, you couldn't have. Corporate became acutely aware that you couldn't have residents per se, because then you'd have a voting public. And you couldn't have that. But they did want to offer some residential opportunities, some, lodging. So the first project out of the box was, the original townhouses. Right. They're built by Continental Construction.
Oh, okay.
And they were 1 and 2 bedroom condos, basically, townhouse condos. And they became really popular. And end up building 3 phases of that. And then, of course, they'd already built the lake. They were building the Lake Buena Vista golf course. Again, Joe Lee designed that course, and Joe had designed the Palm and the Magnolia up near the Magic Kingdom, the golf resort.
Sure.
So Jack Olson was given the task to drive Lake Buena Vista and develop Lake Buena Vista. And Jack had been, or was at the time, corporate VP of merchandising. And so he developed the community of Lake Buena Vista. And like I say, it started with the townhouses and Lake Buena Vista and the Lake Buena Vista Club. And Jack was a Southern Californian. And he lived in Newport Beach. And he was familiar with the Reuben E. Lee restaurant. And he always wanted to do a riverboat restaurant. In the meantime, of course, the old Newport Village, shopping village, Newport Beach, was one of his favorite places. It was like a village type setting. It was residential scale buildings and retail and food and beverage and, kind of mixed use that way. And so he sent Dave Barron and Bob Smith and I out to California to take a look at the Reuben E. Lee and take a look at the village. And we came back and did some concept work and came up with the concept for Lake Buena Vista Shopping Village. And the Empress Lily, which was a kind of a wink and a nod toward the Reuben E. Lee, came online a few years after we finished the village in '75. But it was cutting edge for the area. If you guys remember correctly, there wasn't anything like it in Central Florida.
Oh, right, definitely.
At all. And then the first commercial building was built, that Sunbank building there.
I was going to ask about that because actually a couple of days ago I do a little sort of daily history thing. And a couple of days ago was the anniversary of the opening of that and the announcement of this whole big plaza they were going to build there. Only the Sunbank is the only thing that happened, but
right, there were four buildings in that complex that were going to be built in that complex, and just the one building ended up being built.
Yeah, but that Sunbank had a really nice. It still does. It's not a Sunbank anymore. A really nice atrium on the inside as well.
It did. Yes, it did. Yes, and we did that as well. Yeah,
that's remarkable.
So Lake Buena Vista just continued to grow and bit by bit, and pretty soon Pleasure Island came along, and then the West Side development was Cirque du Soleil, and of course the lodging experiences expanded as well. They had the golf course villas that were built in and around the golf course, and then the treehouse villas.
Oh yes,
down in the woods, and the pedestal homes, and so those were all, and every one of those lodging experiences was different, and it was a completely different environment than staying up, say, at the Polynesian or the Contemporary or.
That's right.
Whatever.
That's right. As Jeff said, they were our favorite when we were kids. Our favorite place to stay. Since we're talking about Lake Buena Vista, I'm always interested in the plans for expansion, especially from the '70s that never happened. I've seen lots of people movers and monorail expansion, things like that. I also seen some about a New Orleans themed area that was going to go next to the Empress Lily. Do you know anything about that?
I don't recall that.
Okay.
I don't recall the New Orleans themed area, but I do know that I was on the fringe part of the planning and development team or design team with Wing. Wing was doing a lot of work and study on the multimodal station that would be people mover, monorail, a monorail connection to Orlando, and all of that occurring there in Lake Buena Vista. There was even I remember at one point there was a stole port down there. Well, we had a stole port up, it's still there, not used, up near the main parking lot up near the Magic Kingdom. But it was going to be multimodal environment there.
That's very interesting. And that's something that they're trying to get off the ground again today.
Yeah.
Everything old is new again, I suppose.
Yeah.
I see your name mentioned all over the Orlando Sentinel back then as kind of a judge of competitions, as a speaker at the Lake Buena Vista shopping villages for some gardening seminars. How did you enjoy that aspect of your work?
Oh, it was fun, especially, and the gardening things at the gatherings at the village, were always lots of fun because you had just average home gardeners who would come.
Mm-hmm.
They were just really fun, and people just enjoyed coming out, and it's a nice place to be, especially if the weather was nice. It was always a lot of fun, and of course, every presentation was a little different from, that was mostly a question answer and explanation, kind of like we're doing today, and then there were other events where, I'd been a keynote address speaker at various conferences and things. And one was National Garden Writers Association had come to the Contemporary Hotel, and I'd been invited to be the keynote speaker there at the Contemporary Hotel, and there were 5,000 garden writers there.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
We're talking about pros, or if not pros, somebody who wanted to be a pro, they just could only write, they couldn't garden. But this particular year, back in the day when you'd have remember the old slide projectors, and the carousel projectors, and our AV department, would set up as many as 5 projectors, and you could have your slides coordinated, and you go through them and they'd fade in and out. And so this one day I'm there a few minutes before the thing's supposed to start, and I give the guy my carousels, AV tech, and I'm showing him which ones now, number 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm walking back up toward the dais, so I can just kind of get a lay of the room, from up there before everybody comes in. And I'm walking away from the projectors, and the next thing I hear is this carousel hit the floor.
Oh, no.
And I turn around and look, and the top ring had come off, and it was rolling back toward the carousel was rolling back toward me, and the slides were one by one tipping out of the.
Oh my gosh!
Went along the floor. So I just shoved them back in there, and you wing it. Sometimes you.
That's right.
Exactly. So, I have one more question before we go today. You talk about people coming to the village there and enjoying all the things that was different. Where in those times did you enjoy hanging out on property or at the village? Was there any place in particular you really enjoyed just spending time?
Everywhere and all the time. Answer. And I'll tell you why. When I worked at Disneyland, as a attraction host is what we call them now, but you work with the public all the time and in a function. You're doing something. Hopefully you're playing your role properly. You're a train conductor or a monorail driver. Or, you're loading people in a bobsled at the Matterhorn, or you're doing whatever. That's a job. That's a task. But when I became a landscape architect and a designer, what I found really rewarding for me was to just spend time in the park. Sit on a bench and listen to people talk, or go stand in a queue and listen to people talk about what they're thinking, what they're seeing, their experiences, and just sitting on a bench and watching how people use spaces that you've designed.
Sure. Right.
The leapfrog fountains at Epcot, at the Imagination Pavilion.
Yes.
I was working with Mark Fuller. We had this exit garden out of the 3D theater, and it was, just a transitory space. And I was thinking, well, how can we make this kind of interesting? And, beyond the kind of goofy shapes that we were trimming trees into, and, so that kind of whimsical shapes. And Mark was working in special effects. He was working on this laminar flow fountain idea and computerized fountains and so forth. And he had designed the upside down fountain at the front of the pavilion. And there was a pool, a small pool area at the edge there. And he was working on a harmonic fountain that had a row of nozzles, about 16 or 18 nozzles. And they were computerizing these nozzles so that they would play a harmonic wave, these nozzles coming on, going off. And so it was a harmonic wave.
Wow.
And I told Mark one day, I said, that's really cool. I said, what would really be great is if, the guests come along and they look at that, watch that harmonic wave for a few minutes, and then just when about the time they get kind of, you think, well, there's nothing else to see, and they start to walk away, have the last nozzle that they don't see at the end of the wave, shoot the water over the edge and down into the water below.
Oh, yeah.
Like in the moat. And he goes, hey, that's not a bad idea. So that's kind of where the first start of the Leapfrog Fountain started. So they started working on this thing. And about 2 or 3 months later, I get a call and he says, hey, come on out to Tahunga. We had a facility, manufacturing facility out in Tahunga, out near Glendale. So I drove out there that morning, and they were throwing these big slugs of water, about 1/2 to 3/4 inch diameter, no oxygen in them. They were throwing these slugs of water out of this laminar flow nozzle under pressure, about 50 feet.
Oh, wow.
Into a 55-gallon drum. This is pretty cool. So Mark said, can you design in the garden some of these like places where we can put these nozzles? We can put a nozzle and a receptacle in the same space, and they can hop from pad to pad. I said, yeah, do that. He said, and then we can adjust how far it goes depending upon how we want to orchestrate this computer. And that's what we did. We designed those pads within the planters so that all of a sudden it took just a pedestrian transitory space and turned it into an interactive, fun environment.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about something that everybody took photos of. This is something that everybody took video of, because now everybody had video cameras.
Right.
Everybody took video cameras of the Leapfrog fountains because it's such a distinctive element of that park.
Right. Well, Mark's a brilliant guy and just so smart and just absolutely brilliant. And of course, he took his company on to do just magical things around the world.
I mean, that's such an interesting thing about WED is that, it's these mix of disciplines, like your idea going to him and just kind of that collaboration just makes some truly amazing experiences.
Well, you bring up something, Jeff, just right there. You bring up something that is so true. And I probably should have mentioned it a long time before now, but when there was, when a new project was announced, there's always a project team identified. And to be in those team meetings, there's someone from every discipline around that table. Sometimes it's 10 people, sometimes it's 15, 20 people. But they're engineers, electrical engineers, structural engineers, mechanical engineers, landscape architects, show designers, copywriters, just everybody, architects around the table, and production people. And the electricity that once the concept or the idea is thrown on the table, the ideas fly around the room like electricity. And it's always a what if, why,
Right.
It's exciting, especially to see the engineers who live in a pretty structured environment professionally be able to say, yeah, gee, I think we might be able to do that.
Right.
So.
Well, Scott, we want to thank you so much for your time. These stories are incredible.
This has been such a delight. This has been fantastic.
Well, my pleasure, and I'm there's plenty more where that came from.
Great. We've got Epcot, Tokyo, and all sorts of stuff to talk about.
Yeah.
That wraps up part 1 of our interview with Scott Girard. We'd like to thank Scott for his time and taking so long and being willing to come back for more. Jeff, what did you think?
I mean, I'm in awe. You want to know all these stories about phase 1 of Walt Disney World. There's a lot of apocryphal stories, and to have someone who was there witnessing it, I mean, and also the Walt stuff. It's incredible. So
the Walt stuff and the Roy. I mean, imagine having Walt and Roy contact. That's crazy. Yeah.
I'm excited to hear what's next. I mean, there's going to be a lot of great stories to come too. So thanks to Scott for all his time. It's been a real treat. And as somebody who is really interested in this kind of stuff, it's particularly interesting to me.
Exactly. And also, as an aside, I'd also like to thank our pal Tom Morris for putting us in touch with Scott in the first place. That was really helpful, so thanks. Now comes the time of every episode when we reach out to our new Patreon members, the people that have decided to get on Patreon and help us produce our show. This month, we have 2 new members. We'd like to welcome Chris and Anne. Thank you both so much. They will be signing up for sneak previews of new episodes, backstage content, and of course, at the silver level, they will be signing up for our monthly live stream event where you get a little more audio-visual content about the subject of the month. And this month being August of 2021, we've got 2 big live streams coming up.
That's right. We, due to my beach trip, we had to delay the July live stream for our Patreon subscribers. So we'll be catching up on that. And then we have a special for the public live stream to give folks a feel of what they'd be getting a little later in the month.
Exactly. So for you Patreon members, the first Patreon only live stream will be Saturday, the 14th of August at 9 p.m. Eastern. And for everybody else, our big public event will be on YouTube. That's going to be the 28th, another Saturday at 9 p.m. Eastern. Again, we still haven't quite figured out everything we're going to do for our big public live stream. So if there's anything you'd like to talk about, anything you'd like us to talk about, anything you'd like to see or hear about, please let us know. Drop us an email or talk to us on Twitter and let us know what you'd like to see and hear. This is a chance for us to do stuff that we don't usually do. So if you want our top 10 whatevers, let us know. And, we'll just get together with everybody and have fun. So keep an eye on progresscityusa.com for more details about that upcoming stream and exactly where it will be on the 28th. And we hope everybody comes out. We look forward to seeing you. Jeff, there are so many ways that people can get in touch with us.
It's true. We live in a digital age. It's just reach out and touch someone, practically.
It's true. You can reach us at podcast@progresscityusa.com. You can reach me on Twitter at ProgressCityUSA. Jeff is at Jeff G. Crawford. We're also on Instagram at ProgressCityUSA and also on Facebook. So get in touch, let us hear, and, we'll put it into our next show. You never know. So with that all being said, we will see you next time with part 2 of our interview with Scott Girard, Epcot, Tokyo, and who knows what else. Really looking forward to it. Thanks for listening.